Tonight, for sleep, we are going beneath the streets of New York in 1897, the year the city's pneumatic mail service began. The network is still new. A single letter will guide us through its longer life as the tubes expand, pause, return, and finally fall quiet in 1953. If one letter must cross Manhattan before the next train leaves, can it travel without entering the street at all? You can follow each handoff, or let the details drift past while you rest. The same letter will keep our place. I am Elias. Subscribe for another quiet journey through hidden history here tomorrow night. It is early enough that the city is still deciding how loudly to begin. A cart moves somewhere beyond the post office wall. A train waits at a terminal across town. Between them stands a clerk, a bundle of letters, and a clock whose hands keep moving even when the traffic outside does not. What can move a heavy cylinder through a buried iron line, guide it around bends and bring it gently to rest? Who prepares the journey when the machine appears to do everything by itself? And if this hidden network was fast and useful, why did New York eventually let it fall quiet? On the sorting table, paper edges form a pale, uneven line. Inked addresses face upward. Twine lies loose beside a small stack. The clerk's hands move without hurry, but not without consequence. A bundle sent into the wrong carrier will be fast in the wrong direction. A bundle left too long on the table may reach the right station after the useful train is gone. Near the table is the mouth of the system. It is not a glowing tunnel or a great railway bore. It is a working terminal built around a tube just wide enough for its carrier. The cylinder is solid enough to feel substantial in two hands. Its closure must hold. Its outer label must be legible. Once the door closes, the letters inside will leave this room without wheels, hooves, or a driver. For a few moments, the city above and the line below seem to be waiting for the same small decision. The clerk checks the destination again. Then the carrier is closed. Before our carrier can move, the mail inside it has already passed through several judgments. Someone accepted each letter. Someone brought it into the station. Someone separated local movement from onward movement. Now the tube clerk must prepare a bundle that can pass cleanly to another room in the postal system. The task sounds modest. It is also the point where speed becomes useful or useless. The clock squares the paper against the table. Loose corners are brought into line. A bundle must fit the carrier without catching its closure. It must be firm enough to remain orderly when the cylinder starts, turns, slows, and arrives. The machine can move whatever is placed inside, but it cannot correct a careless address or decide that two bundles were tied together by mistake. You may know this feeling from any familiar routine. A fast kitchen depends on labels before plates leave the pass. A railway depends on signals before a train gathers speed. A computer network depends on an address before a packet begins to travel. The impressive movement comes later. Trust begins at the quiet point where someone checks the destination. On New York carriers, that destination could appear on the outside. A late official description says the carrier stayed closed until it reached the proper station. That detail gives our clerk's pause a practical shape. The level is not decoration. It is the visible promise carried from one worker to the next. He turns the cylinder enough to see it clearly. This is an unnamed working role, reconstructed from documented tasks rather than a recorded individual's life. We will stay with what hands, tools, and procedures can show. The carrier receives its bundle. The cover settles into place. A closure meets the body and the clerk checks it once more. Nothing in the room has become dramatic. That is part of the system's appeal. A good dispatch should look ordinary to the person trained to make it. Nearby, other carriers wait. A late report counted about 95,000 carrier movements over all part of the network during a full operating day. That number refers to movements, not letters, and it belongs to the mature system described in 1948. We need not picture them all at once. It is enough to imagine one prepared cylinder joining a long, measured sequence of similar decisions. The terminal door opens. The clerk presents the carrier in the correct orientation. Depending on the design and station, a terminal might accept a carrier into a chamber, isolate the opening, and connect the route to moving air. Safety begins with keeping the operator separate from that airflow while the line is active. The carrier is placed inside. The door closes between the clerk and the buried route. At this moment, responsibility changes hands. The clerk has done what paper and label require. The terminal must now do what valves, seals, and air require. Farther along the line, another worker will eventually inherit the same bundle. But first, the cylinder must behave like a very particular object. It must be broad enough to catch the moving air, narrow enough to travel freely, strong enough to protect its contents, and gentle enough at its edges to avoid wasting force against the tube. So before we send it into the dark, we will turn it once more in the lamplight and see why a carrier built for wind looks the way it does. On the workbench, the carrier seems less like a message and more like a piece of practical engineering. It has a long body, a secure cover, and surfaces that nearly meet the wall of the tube. Each part answers a different need. The body protects the mail. The closure keeps the bundle from escaping when the cylinder turns or slows. Guide surfaces help the carrier remain centered. Soft or flexible rings can reduce leakage while giving the moving air a broad face to press against. The fit must be close, but a carrier that rubs too firmly against the line spends its useful force on friction. Patents from the period and nearby decades are full of attention to these plain troubles. Inventors considered wheels, felt heads, guide pins, closures, bearings, curved sections, and ways to keep one carrier from interfering with another. Their drawings can look wonderfully complicated. Beneath the numbered lines is a simple concern. The cylinder must move many times without turning every ordinary trip into a repair. Our maintenance roll lifts the carrier and looks along its length. This roll is also a composite, bounded by equipment and recorded procedures. There is no secret tunnel walk here, and no heroic last-second rescue. There is only preventive care, a closure that sits correctly, a guide surface that has not worn unevenly, and a label holder that remains clear. Different records give different carrier capacities. The useful New York range is about 400 to 600 letters, with reported speeds around 30 to 35 miles per hour. The range matters. Carriers changed, service periods changed, and a cylinder full of thin letters was not identical to one holding thicker material. One exact number would make the history feel neater than the equipment really was. Even so, the scale is easy to feel. 400 letters are more than a person would want to carry loose through a crowded street. Enclosed in one labeled cylinder, they become a single object that a terminal can handle again and again. The carrier's weight also belongs to the story. It is not a paper message drifting through a speaking tube. It is metal and contents moving with enough momentum to require a planned arrival. A good system needs to start that mass, guide it, and take its energy away without damaging the mail or frightening the worker at the receiving end. This is why terminal design matters as much as the straight pipe. A chamber admits the carrier. A door separates the operator from active airflow. Valves open a useful path and close an unsafe one. A receiver gives the arriving cylinder somewhere to slow, settle, or drop into reach. At a bend, the outer side of the carrier wants to press against the curve. Engineers proposed wheels or moving surfaces at difficult turns, allowing the cylinder to roll through the change of direction rather than scrape and bind. At a junction, a guide or switch must favor one branch while leaving the main route ready for the next carrier. The maintenance roll turns the carrier one final time. Its shape now tells us what the tube expects. The body holds the letters while the ends catch the air. The guides control contact and the closure protects the bundle. The label transfers human intent into the machine. Nothing on the workbench can move by itself. Yet almost every surface has prepared for motion. The carrier returns to the terminal chamber. Beyond the closed door, the line is still. In some designs, it remains unpressurized between dispatches. The next movement begins only when the machinery opens the right path. The object is ready. Now we can follow the air. In the blower room, the most important movement may be the one you cannot see. An electric motor turns. A rotary blower or compressor begins to change the pressure in the line. The sound can remain low and steady, more like ventilation than a locomotive. Pipes connect the machinery to terminals and routes. Valves decide where the moving air is allowed to go. There are two helpful ways to picture the carrier's journey. Air at higher pressure behind the cylinder can push it forward, or lower pressure ahead can let the atmosphere behind it drive the carrier toward a partial vacuum. Systems could use pressure, suction, or an arrangement that changed mode with direction. The carrier does not need air rushing through its center. It needs a pressure difference across its ends. Because the cylinder nearly fills the tube, the air has difficulty slipping past. Force gathers over the broad end of the carrier and begins to move the whole object. Inside a dispatch terminal, a mechanical pusher could start the carrier into the line. Once the end entered the tube, pressure behind it continued the work. In a receiving mode, a vacuum path ahead could draw the carrier toward the terminal. A valve flap might remain closed under pressure and open under vacuum, changing the useful path without asking a clerk to reach into the moving air. This is a lovely part of the mechanism, not because it is magical, but because each condition helps choose the next action. Pressure moves one flap. Vacuum moves another. A closed cover prevents air from escaping through the operator's opening. A timed control can shut the airflow after the carrier has had enough time to arrive. Some designs left the line quiet between movements. The blower did not need to force full working air through an empty route forever. A dispatch changed the condition. The carrier traveled, and the system returned toward rest. You can imagine the sequence in the same measured order as the machinery. First, the carrier waits inside a closed chamber. Then a valve connects the useful air path. Pressure rises behind the cylinder, or suction lowers the pressure ahead. The carrier begins to move. As it leaves the chamber, its own body helps seal the route. Air continues to act across the difference between front and rear. The cylinder gains speed along the prepared line. At the far end, the system must change its work from acceleration to reception. A curved chamber, cushion of air, or mechanical stop reduces motion. The carrier reaches a place where another door can open safely. This single part carries the whole explanation. The motor supplies energy while the blower moves air. Valves choose a route, and the terminal protects the operator. The fitted carrier converts pressure difference into travel before the receiver removes speed. Together, they turn an invisible fluid into a repeated postal movement. This also explains why maintenance begins long before a carrier sticks. A leaking closure lets useful air slip away. A worn guide increases friction. A valve that closes slowly wastes pressure. A poor seal at a terminal changes the behavior of the whole line. The system is fast only after it has become orderly. You may recognize the same quiet bargain in an elevator or a train door. The movement feels effortless only because someone has already checked the parts that must agree. Our carrier has now left the sending chamber. Behind it is the clerk's label. Ahead is a route chosen in iron, valves, and branch points. Above it are wagon wheels, footsteps, water mains, gas pipes, cellar walls, and the first underground structures of a growing city. The straight tube is the easy part. Manhattan is about to ask the carrier to turn. The carrier enters the buried line with its destination already decided. Above it, the street has no reason to notice. Horses and wagons continue to occupy the surface. Pedestrians step around deliveries. Telegraph messages arrive as information, but still require paper and a person to finish their local journey. beneath this congestion, the postal cylinder follows a route that does not pause for a crossing or wait behind a cart. New York's early service connected postal points where a fast transfer could protect an onward schedule. The first routes were much smaller than the later network. Over time, lines reached more stations and crossed Manhattan in several directions. One celebrated connection traveled across the Brooklyn Bridge, carrying mail between the Manhattan and Brooklyn postal systems without putting its carrier among the bridge traffic. Our letter can remain representative following the procedures of this route and period. Its exact address stays folded inside the bundle, while the machinery carries us through the journey that many letters shared. The carrier meets a gradual bend. Its guides touch lightly. Air continues to act behind it, where a curve creates extra pressure against the outer wall. A carefully shaped section or moving guide can reduce the tendency to bind. The cylinder turns and continues. At a junction, direction becomes more interesting. A system that serves several stations needs a way to select one branch. Pattern drawings show guide pins, switch ribs, valves, and mechanical arrangements that distinguish carriers or control openings. One design aimed to keep a carrier from passing into any station except the one to which it belonged. The destination label remains a human instruction. The route hardware provides a physical decision. The two belong to different layers of the system. A clerk can see the label and place the carrier into the right dispatch. A junction can then guide the moving object along the prepared branch. There is no room below the street for careless geometry. Existing sewers, gas lines, water pipes, building foundations, and high water could make installation difficult. A pneumatic line was not drawn across an empty page. It occupied contested space in a city already full of necessary things. That crowded underground world helps explain the diameter of the tubes. A larger carrier can hold more mail, but a larger pipe costs more to build and becomes harder to fit around what is already there. The network's physical limits begin long before a motor vehicle appears in the decline story. Our carrier moves through another straight section. In a reported operating range, cylinders could travel around 30 to 35 miles per hour. One older test paper described 33 miles per hour under a specific pressure, but that belongs to its test arrangement. What matters for our journey is the order of magnitude. A route that might take a wagon many minutes in traffic could be covered by a carrier in a small part of that time. The first question from the opening now has a practical answer. A letter can cross congested Manhattan without entering the street by becoming part of a prepared bundle, entering a labeled close-fitting carrier, and following a fixed two route driven by controlled air. Yet the letter has not been delivered. The carrier approaches its station. Airflow and terminal geometry begin to remove speed. A receiver waits behind a protected door. The cylinder reaches the end of the branch and settles into the place built for its arrival. The hidden journey is complete. The postal journey is not. On the other side of the terminal, a second clerk is about to open the same label that began our route. At the receiving station, the carrier is once again an object that can be held. The door opens only after the moving air has been isolated. A clerk lifts the cylinder from its chamber and turns the label into view. The destination that guided the dispatch has followed the bundle to the proper route. Now the machine's responsibility ends and human judgment resumes. The closure opens. Paper returns to Lamplight. Inside, the letters are still only partway through their work. Some may need another local sorting. Some may join an outward train. Some may pass to a carrier who knows a delivery district above ground. The pneumatic line has removed one delay between postal points. It has not replaced the surrounding system. This is the quiet surprise at the center of our journey. The tube is a rapid bridge between rooms. On both sides stand people who prepare what enters and interpret what comes out. The receiving clerk checks the bundle before releasing it. Twine is loosened. Addresses return to view. Letters move into cases or smaller groups. The surface carrier, railway clerk, wagon driver, or another postal route may inherit them next, depending on place and period. Our representative letter is placed with the correct onward group. You can let the rest of its personal destination remain unwritten. We do not need an invented recipient waiting at a window. The real payoff is procedural. The letter has moved from table to carrier, from carrier to tube, from tube to terminal, and from terminal back to a table where the next decision can be made. The first clerk's care now echoes in the second clerk's hands. A clear label saved time because it remained useful at arrival. A secure bundle saved time because it remained orderly. A correct route saved time because the cylinder emerged in the room where its contents could continue. If any one of these conditions failed, speed inside the pipe could not repair the mistake. This is why a system can be technically fast and operationally slow, or technically simple and operationally demanding. Useful speed includes every handoff around the measured run. Imagine two clocks for a moment. One records only the cylinder's minutes in the tube. The other records the letter from its first sorting decision to the moment it joins the next route. Engineers can improve the first clock with pressure, seals, and straighter lines. Postal managers must care about the second. The network earned its place when the fast clock improved the whole journey. It faced criticism when the fixed link cost too much, carried too little of the changing mail stream, or connected places that no longer matched the most useful flow. We will reach that argument later. For now, the letter has received the concrete reward promised at the beginning. It crossed the city beneath the street, arrived at the intended station, and returned to human hands ready for final delivery. The clerk places the empty carrier with others that will make another journey. Some systems use separate routes for return movement. Others could reverse airflow or direct a carrier through a paired line. The cylinder itself becomes part of a circulating stock, repeatedly moving out and coming back. One journey is easy to follow. Thousands require schedules, labels, power, maintenance, rooms, routes, and workers arranged across the city. So we can allow our letter to continue above ground without us. We will remain near the terminal and unfold the larger map. Spread across a planning table, the late network becomes a set of lines between named postal rooms. There is a temptation to call it a web under New York and leave the picture beautifully vague. The records give us a better image. In 1948, a Senate report described 26.969 miles of double tube operating in New York City. In ordinary speech, about 27 miles is enough. The phrase double tube or double line matters because it describes paired directions and should not be turned into a larger mystery by careless counting. The same report connected roughly 22 substations with the General Post Office in Brooklyn. Other official descriptions vary slightly by year, route, and the way facilities were counted. A living network changes. A line is added, moved, shortened, or taken out of use. A station opens, closes, or receives a different name. The safe map is therefore a dated map. We begin near the main postal facilities and trace lines toward important stations. Routes run along the island and across it. One line reaches Brooklyn by the bridge. Others serve districts where the difference between a slow service transfer and a fast underground transfer can protect railway, ship, or local dispatch schedules. The network does not reach every address. It connects postal nodes. That distinction keeps our story honest and makes the engineering more interesting. The two brings mail closer to its next useful decision. It does not carry a letter through a private wall to a recipient's desk. A proposal in 1921 described extending a custom house line about 1¼ miles toward the General Post Office. Proposals like this reveal how planners thought. A missing connection was not an abstract blank. It was a delay between two active points measured against the cost of more pipe, stations, power, and contract obligations. On another page, the mature network's daily movement can look enormous. About 95,000 carrier journeys were reported over all or part of the system during a full operating day. Because each cylinder could hold hundreds of letters, the mail volume inside those movements was much larger. The two measures are not interchangeable. One counts moving containers, the other counts pieces of mail. You may notice how the map has changed our understanding of speed. A carrier can be fast between two connected stations. A fixed network can also be slow to adapt when the most useful points change. The same rails of intention that make routing reliable can make relocation expensive. This is true of many systems around us. A road is useful because it has a stable path. A pipe is useful because it firmly connects source and destination. A cable is useful because it remains where engineers can find and maintain it. Stability creates value. Stability also creates obligation. New York's tubes were privately built at important periods and used by the post office under contracts or leases. The public service depended on equipment it did not always own outright. That arrangement shaped debates over rent, maintenance, power, labor, valuation, purchase, and renewal. The map therefore has two kinds of lines. One is physical, drawn beneath the street. The other is institutional, drawn through contracts, appropriations, companies, and government decisions. Neither line operates itself. At every node, rooms must be staffed. Carriers must be prepared and returned. Machinery needs power. Test movements may precede regular service. Faults need investigation. Mail arriving from trains or ships must be brought into the local flow, and outgoing bundles must reach their next deadline. The more complete our map becomes, the less the system resembles a single invention. It begins to resemble a city of work. At 5 in the morning, a tube line may be ready before most of the street has reached its daytime rhythm. Readiness is not one switch. It is a collection of completed tasks. A clerk sorts and bundles the mail. Another checks destinations and loads carriers. A terminal operator manages dispatch and receipt. Someone monitors power and airflow. Maintenance roles inspect closures, lines, guides, and machinery. At the far station, another clerk opens the carrier and returns its contents to sorting. Surface carriers, wagons, railway clerks, and other routes complete the movement beyond the tube. The boundaries between titles and duties could vary, but the responsibility chain remains visible. Each person receives something prepared by someone else and leads it ready for the next person. Our maintenance role begins with the least dramatic result in the building. Nothing goes wrong. A carrier closure is checked before its failure can scatter or damage mail. A worn guide surface is noticed before friction becomes a stoppage. A valve is observed before leakage reduces working pressure. A terminal door remains secure so the operator can handle a carrier without meeting active airflow. Pattern records are useful here because they preserve the kinds of trouble designers expected. Carriers could stick in curves. Two carriers could approach a junction too closely. Air could escape through the wrong opening. The switch could need a reliable way to select one branch. A receiver had to accept one carrier without leaving the route unsafe for the next. These documents describe proposed solutions, not a complete maintenance manual for every New York station. Yet they give the hidden labor an honest boundary. Workers cared for surfaces, closures, moving parts, airflow, and timing because those were the places where the system's reliability lived. There is quiet skill in recognizing a machine by its ordinary sounds. A blower that keeps a steady note. A valve that completes its movement. A carrier that arrives with the expected delay after dispatch. We need not invent a particular worker's thoughts to understand the pressure of the task. The observable standard is enough. The route should remain ready, and the mail should emerge orderly. The receiving clerk has a different kind of attention. Several carriers can arrive carrying different groups of mail. Each label must lead to the right next action. Empty cylinders must rejoin the circulation. The sorting table should not become the congestion that the underground line was built to avoid. This is why automation and labor pour opposites in our story. The tube automates a bounded movement. Its success increases the importance of preparation and reception. Faster arrivals can demand better organization at the table. Think again of our two clocks. The carrier clock may improve as speed rises. The postal clock improves only if every roll around it can absorb the faster flow. The same principle explains why snow could reveal the network's strength. Buried fixed routes did not depend on clear pavement for their internal movement. But workers still had to reach stations, operate equipment, sort mail, and complete delivery beyond the tube. Resilience in one link does not make every link invulnerable. It gives the wider service one dependable path amid disruption. By now, the third opening question has its answer. A fast tube needed many workers because the machine moved carriers, not intentions. People supplied the addresses, grouping, timing, inspection, interpretation, and final care that made speed meaningful. And those people worked inside a system with rent, power, maintenance, and fixed geography. Their competence could keep the network useful. It cannot make the obligations disappear. The next part of the story belongs to that difference. In a hearing room or an official report, the tube network loses some of its warm mechanical charm. The carrier becomes mileage. The blower becomes power expense. The station becomes rent and labor. A useful shortcut must now answer a second question: useful at what cost for which mail, between which places, and compared with what alternative? Contemporary officials did not agree on one simple judgment. A 1921 commission studied New York's pneumatic service and concluded that it expedited both local mail and mail continuing across the country. The tubes offered steady movement between stations and terminals, free from ordinary street congestion. An opposing view accepted that a small share of mail could move faster, yet argued that the benefit did not justify the large expense. Both positions can be present without weakening the story. They reveal the real decision. The question was never whether a carrier could move quickly through a tube. It plainly could. The question was whether this fast link improved enough of the whole postal task to justify its fixed obligations. Private ownership made the calculation more complicated. In important periods, companies built or owned the lines while the post office paid under contracts or leases. Government records discuss rates per mile, labor, power, valuation, purchase, renewal, and restoration. Each negotiation could reopen the balance between public need and private infrastructure. Capacity also mattered. A carrier could hold hundreds of letters, which sounds generous at the workbench. A wagon or truck could carry larger and more varied loads, including pouches and parcels that did not fit the tube. Parcel post and changing mail streams made flexibility more valuable. Geography mattered in the same way. A tube is excellent between the two stations it joins. A motor vehicle can alter its route when a facility moves, a bridge closes, a schedule changes, or the useful distribution point shifts. The tube's strength is commitment. The vehicle's strength is choice. Maintenance and underground competition added quieter costs. A buried route must coexist with other utilities. Repairs can require access in busy streets or confined station spaces. Curbs, seals, blowers, valves, and receivers remain valuable only while they are maintained as one connected system. None of this makes the tubes foolish. Infrastructure often works by accepting a large fixed cost in exchange for reliable repeated movement. A bridge, railway, sewer, or cable network would be useless if judged only by its inability to change direction tomorrow morning. The fair comparison asks whether the repeated movement remains important enough, long enough to justify that commitment. For New York, congestion kept the argument alive. Street vehicles became more capable, but traffic did not disappear. The tube retained a narrow advantage wherever steady, rapid letter movement between fixed postal points still mattered. This is why the history refuses to end neatly in 1918. Wartime economy and departmental criticism led to suspension, yet the physical lines remained. Advocates could point to speed and congestion. Critics could point to cost and changing alternatives. Owners could offer renewed terms. Postal experts could reconsider how the network fit a reorganized service. A postal decision-maker therefore faces no theatrical lever marked progress on one side and failure on the other. The table holds route maps, contracts, movement data, street conditions, and mail schedules. The observable choice is administrative: stop, negotiate, restore, shorten, or continue. The system's future will be made through several such choices. After this chapter, the story can begin to soften. The core mechanism is known, the letter has arrived, and the worker chain is visible. The remaining journey follows time rather than pressure. We move into a period when the old tubes lay quiet beneath the street, still present, still debated, and still capable of returning. When pneumatic service was suspended during the First World War period, the tubes did not vanish from the ground. Machinery could be dismantled or taken out of service. Routes could remain beneath the streets. A technology can stop operationally while continuing to exist physically, financially, and politically. By 1921, a postal commission examined New York's needs and the possibility of restoration. Its report described the former system as dismantled, while the tube still lay ready to be considered again. Owners offered terms for reinstallation by sale or rent. The commission found value in the rapid, steady movement of mail and recommended negotiation. This moment is useful because it separates three things that are often folded together. There's the pipe beneath the street. There is the machinery and labor needed to operate it. And there is the public decision to pay for service. The pipe can remain while the other two stop. Restoration required more than turning an old blower back on. Routes and stations had changed, equipment needed attention, and contracts needed terms. Postal managers had to decide which connections still served the current flow of mail. The act authorizing restored New York service led to a contract beginning in September 1922. Later official reporting described about 27 miles of double line, with the main office, major Manhattan stations, and Brooklyn connected. The mature network was therefore not simply the untouched 1890 system waking from sleep. It was a renewed arrangement shaped by new facilities and decisions. This is the gentler rhythm of infrastructure history. A line opens, and the city grows around it. A war changes budgets, and a department suspends service. Congestion persists until a commission studies the old route. Contracts return as stations move, and the network adapts where adaptation remains practical. From the listener's distance, it can be tempting to make one actor responsible for every turn. Contractors had interests, while postal officials had competing priorities. Congress controlled appropriations and authority. Businesses cared about rapid letter movement, and workers cared about functioning procedures and employment. Yet the clearest story is institutional rather than personal. It is visible in votes, reports, offers, contracts, routes, and operating hours. The restored network continued for decades. That duration matters. A system that returned in the 1920s and operated into the early 1950s was more than a brief novelty. It remained a working answer for some important movements even while vehicles, roads, buildings, and mail volumes changed. Its survival also sharpened the question of ownership. A 1948 Senate report identified the New York Mail and Newspaper Transportation Company, a Lamson subsidiary, as owner of the system. Government retained service through payment and agreement rather than simply treating the tubes as an ordinary department-owned hallway. Each renewal therefore carried the physical past forward. A route laid for one generation of stations had to justify itself to another generation of managers. A contract based on one operating pattern met new costs. A carrier designed for letter bundles met a mail stream with growing demands for different kinds of transport. Still, on a normal morning, a clerk did not handle the philosophy of infrastructure. The clerk handled labels, carriers, and schedules. That return to ordinary work is important. Decisions at the top become routines at the station. A restored appropriation becomes a motor turning in a blower room. A signed contract becomes a carrier accepted at 5 in the morning. A debated route becomes a bundle arriving in time for a train. We will look at the mature network through one of its fairest moments, when the surface city slowed under heavy snow and the underground link continued to move. Snow changes the sound of a city before it changes anything else. Edges soften, hooves and tires lose some of their sharpness. Footsteps become slower and more deliberate. In Christmas week of 1947, a snowfall of more than 20 inches disrupted New York's surface movement. Streets that normally carry the city's urgent traffic became difficult or nearly still. Below the surface, the pneumatic routes remained where they had always been. A 1948 Senate report used that snowy week to argue for the system's value. Mail distribution through the tubes continued while surface conditions were severely affected. The report had a purpose, and its language favored retaining the service. Even so, the episode gives us a useful success case within a specific time and place. The Underground Line had no snow to clear. At the station, work still began with people. A clerk prepared a bundle and checked its destination label. The carrier entered its terminal, and the blower moved air through a fixed route. Another clerk received and sorted the contents. The same inflexibility that created long-term cost now offered short-term resilience. The route could not choose a new street, but it did not need a clear street. Its limits and strengths were two sides of the same physical fact. Imagine our opening carrier returning during this winter week. The label is still the first promise. The closure is still checked. The terminal still needs power. The receiver still needs a waiting hand. What changes is the comparison above ground. The ordinary street transfer has become less predictable, so the tube's steady internal movement becomes more valuable. The late report described a large daily rhythm. About 95,000 carrier journeys moved over all or part of the system in a full operating day. Roughly 27 miles of double line connected major stations. Carriers traveled repeatedly rather than disappearing at their destination. Empty cylinders returned, schedules continued, and workers kept the circulation balanced. Numbers at this scale can become tiring at night, so let them settle into one image. Picture a single labeled carrier leaving a room every few moments, followed by another after the route is ready. Elsewhere, another arrives. Across the network, similar small movements create a continuous flow without any one terminal holding the entire system in view. This is what infrastructure often feels like from inside. No worker sees the whole map in motion. Each person maintains one trustworthy boundary. The correct bundle waits behind a closed door until airflow is available. The carrier arrives and the letters enter the next case. During the snow, that chain remained useful. Yet one successful week could not settle every question about the future. The post office still had to consider rent, ownership, maintenance, capacity, and the changing geography of facilities. Motor vehicles would continue to improve. Mail would continue to include forms the cylinders handled poorly. We give the network this chapter because decline stories should not erase competence. The tubes did real work for decades. Officials restored them after suspension and workers kept them moving. Under certain conditions, their fixed underground path was exactly the advantage New York needed. Only after that success is clear can the ending be fair. As winter passes, the city returns to its streets. Traffic moves again, while bridges require repair and postal facilities continue to change. A system built around fixed lines must once more justify the cost of remaining fixed. The question is no longer whether the tubes were. It is whether the whole postal service still needs this particular kind of working. The final answer comes quietly, one connection at a time. The Brooklyn connection ended before the rest of New York's service. On April 28, 1950, pneumatic mail movement across the Brooklyn Bridge stopped as bridge work changed the space the tubes occupied. The line was removed and was not restored. This was not yet the final silence across Manhattan. It was one important route leaving the map. That sequence helps us resist the picture of a single last switch thrown everywhere at once. Infrastructure usually recedes unevenly. One segment becomes difficult to repair. Another still serves a valuable pair of stations. A contract reaches a decision point. A facility moves. Equipment ages. Managers reduced the system to the routes that continue to justify themselves. For the Brooklyn line, bridge work supplied a direct physical reason. Restoration would have required new commitment and expense. By 1950, the surrounding postal world offered more flexible choices than it had in 1898. Motor vehicles belong in this explanation, but they do not deserve the whole story. Trucks could carry pouches, parcels, and larger mixed loads. They could change route when streets, schedules, or facilities changed. They required roads and drivers, and traffic could still delay them, yet their flexibility was increasingly valuable. The tubes answered a narrower need. They moved suitable mail quickly between fixed connected stations. When those exact transfers remained important, the network could excel. When the useful flow shifted, every change asked for construction, negotiation, and specialized maintenance. Cost belongs beside flexibility. Private ownership and lease arrangements kept rates and terms in official debate. Power and personnel remained necessary. The network's many mechanical parts had to stay reliable together. A dormant segment could not earn its keep merely by existing below the street. Capacity belongs here too. Hundreds of letters in one carrier were impressive, but the postal service moved far more than flat first-class letters. A transport system that could accept a large bag or a parcel without special dimensions solved a wider set of problems. Then there was geography. Post offices, railway terminals, business districts, and sorting methods changed. A line built for an earlier map could remain fast while becoming less central to the new one. No single cause has to be declared the winner. The decline becomes clearer when we watch the causes cooperate. Vehicles widened the available alternative. Fixed routes made adaptation costly. Contracts kept ownership and payment in view. Capacity limited the range of mail. Maintenance preserved an aging connected system. Bridge work removed a major link. Changing facilities altered which transfers mattered most. Together, these pressures changed the answer to the same practical question officials had asked for decades. Did the fast tube improve enough of the total journey to justify continuing it? On December 31st, 1953, the remaining New York pneumatic mail service ended for a second and final time. Official accounts sometimes describe suspension pending review, followed by no reinstatement. The wording is appropriately administrative. There was no need for a grand mechanical failure. The network could stop because the institution chose not to continue paying, operating, and adapting it. Records give us the end date, though they leave no complete intimate scene with one named clerk and one specially chosen letter. The farewell can therefore remain as ordinary as the work itself. Instead, picture an ordinary closing routine. A carrier has arrived. Its label is checked while its contents are sorted, and the empty cylinder rests near the terminal. A motor slows. Whatever private meaning the moment held for workers remains theirs, beyond our sources. The mechanism has already paid its promise. It pushed and pulled carriers through tubes. The people had paid theirs too. They prepared, monitored, maintained, received, and delivered the mail. The system ends not because those actions were absurd, but because the balance around them changed. That is the last answer from our opening. New York let a fast, useful network fall quiet when its fixed, specialized advantage no longer outweighed the combined cost of ownership, maintenance, limited capacity, changing geography, and more adaptable transport. Above the old routes, traffic continued. Below them, portions of tube were removed, abandoned, sealed, or lost during later work. The buried network ceased to be one operating thing, yet the idea inside it remained available. Move a secure carrier through a controlled tube. Give it a clear origin and destination. Let air handle the distance while people handle meaning at each end. For the last chapter, we will follow that idea rather than any legend of a secret intact tunnel. In a museum case, a pneumatic mail carrier has become still enough to study. Its metal body no longer disappears into a terminal. The closure can be examined. The guide surfaces can be seen. A label holder waits without a destination. The object that once belonged to a moving circulation now preserves the shape of that movement. Nearby, a photograph may show postal equipment and workers in a New York room. Patent drawings spread terminals and carriers into clean numbered parts. Congressional pages preserve the language of mileage, rates, capacity, and service value. These remnants do not recreate every ordinary day, but together they let us understand the chain without filling its gaps with fantasy. There are also stories that have gathered around the tubes. One often repeated anecdote says a cat traveled in a carrier during an opening ceremony. The story is memorable, and that may be why it has traveled so well itself. Its evidentiary path is weaker than its popularity. For this journey, it can remain an anecdote at the edge of the room rather than the engine of the history. Claims of a continuous accessible mail tube network beneath Manhattan deserve even more care. Some physical remnants have been reported in station buildings. An old route certainly occupied real space below streets and across the Brooklyn Bridge. That is different from an intact secret system waiting to be explored. Later construction, removal, abandonment, and changing buildings broke the network's physical continuity. The strongest surviving trace is the engineering idea. Pneumatic carriers continue to move cash, messages, books, and small objects in other settings. Department stores used related systems. Banks made the carrier familiar to drivers at remote telestations. Libraries sent requests or materials through local tubes. Hospitals developed networks for specimens and supplies. These are not descendants in the sense of one New York postal institution handing its equipment directly to a modern hospital. They share a working principle. A secure object is assigned a route. Air supplies movement. Terminals protect the people at both ends. Local procedures decide what the system is allowed to carry. Modern hospital research adds a useful final lesson. One study found its tested system suitable for routine blood bank type and cross-match specimens, yet warned that slight hemolysis made the same system unsuitable for samples used to investigate transfusion reactions. Another study found no link between its particular route and a serum hemolysis measure while keeping test-specific limits. The calm conclusion is not that pneumatic tubes are safe or unsafe in general. It is that each system must be validated for its route, speed, acceleration, carrier, container, fill level, and material. That lesson would have felt familiar to the people who worked around postal carriers. Fit, seals, and curves all matter. The thing being carried matters just as much. A successful line is not simply a pipe with air in it. It is a physical route matched to an agreed task. Our representative letter returns one final time. It lies on the opening table beside the carrier. We now know what had to happen before the brass door closed. Workers sorted the bundle, checked its destination, and prepared the cylinder. A terminal isolated the route before pressure behind or lower pressure ahead began the movement. Curves and branches guided it, and the receiver removed its speed. Another clerk opened the carrier and returned the letter to the larger postal flow. We also know why that elegant movement was not enough to preserve the network forever. The tube's speed was real. So were its fixed routes, specialized capacity, private contracts, power, maintenance, and dependence on postal geography. Vehicles offered a wider range of choices. Bridge work removed a connection. Facilities and mail changed. The institution eventually stopped renewing the old answer. The ingenious part was never only the rush of air. It was the agreement among people, machines, labels, rooms, and routes that let the air become useful. That changed belief can make many hidden systems easier to see. Water reaches a tap because responsibilities were completed far away. A train arrives because signals, track, power, and schedules were handed from one role to another. A digital message seems immediate because addresses, cables, machines, and protocols quietly agree on its path. New York's pneumatic mail made this coordination unusually tangible. It placed letters inside metal carriers and sent the carriers through iron tubes. The movement was hidden, but the handoffs were not. Each end required a table, a worker, and a decision. The city has grown over the old routes. Streets have been opened and closed many times. Postal buildings have changed purpose. The working network has gone. Tonight, it is enough to leave one carrier at rest. The destination label has done its work. The letter has arrived. The blower room is quiet. Above the ceiling, the city continues at a comfortable distance. Below the street, no secret traffic needs our attention. There is only the memory of paper moving through darkness, guided by air and by the patient order of many hands. You can let the route fade now. The table remains warm in the lamplight. And the last small sound is not a cylinder rushing away, but a sheet of paper settling softly among the letters that have already found their place.